So it's been a while since I last uploaded a video, and it's really just not for any other reason aside from the fact that work has just been very busy recently. So I just haven't had the time to really script anything or get any ideas written down. So yeah, it's just been a bit of a tricky one, but I have had a couple of days off for the last few days, which has been a nice chance to sort of rest and recuperate. And in that time, I have seen No Time to Die twice, and I figured, you know what, let's just do something a little bit more informal, off the cuff, not scripted. Well, don't worry, not going completely off the rails. I do have some notes here in front of me, but I wanted to put out a video that was a bit more informal than what I typically do, so that first it's just easier to get out and I can be a bit more punctual because otherwise I know that if I wrote down a full script, it could be weeks before this could get out, at which point people might not even care about the movie at all. No, I'm only kidding. It's such a good movie. I'm sure people are going to be talking about this for a while, but yeah, just for that reason, really, I just wanted to get it done. And yeah, it'd just be nice to have a new video out on the channel, which, by the way, thank you for swinging by. If you haven't subscribed yet, that would make my day if you could hit that button. If you're feeling extra generous, why not hit that like button as well? Always makes my day whenever that happens. Honestly, I do check regularly, and so yeah, if you want to make some dude's day, then by all means do that, and yeah, I'll send good thoughts your way. But anyway, I'm rambling now. See, this is what's going to happen by me not having a proper script, but we're just going to keep rolling with it, see what happens. So, for the record, I am not a huge Bond fan. I grew up watching the Bourne movies, which, you know, as anyone who is probably of the same age as me, or even just preferred watching those movies, what the Bourne movies did really well was focus on just a very concise story. It was all about a personal story as well, which kept the stakes raised and you were invested in what was going on. It wasn't superficial, there was no time wasted, no random sort of plot points brought in at the last second. It was all around trying to figure out who Bourne was and what sort of life he had led up until the point when the first movie began. And that was really interesting to me. By comparison, especially the Pierce Brosnan Bond films, that all just seemed like it was so like just daft and just really silly, but not in a self-referential way. Like it was just Bond being what people expected Bond to be, but without having any sort of, I guess, nuance to it or any intention to do something new. It really was just, how can we pander to what people want or expect from a Bond movie? And again, on a similar thread, Mission Impossible has managed to evolve surprisingly well by comparison to Bond. While that did start out as, you know, a movie that was specifically about Tom Cruise's character and, you know, his various exploits, over the years it has evolved into this almost like a teamwork franchise where it's not just about him, it's about his team and the various plots for world domination that they have to thwart. And it's just much more interesting to see him play off the different characters in different ways. That just shows, to me, that always showed that the series at least recognized that if it kept going on the way that it did, it probably wasn't going to last. And I think that's what a lot of people realized with Spectre when that came out 6 years ago now. It's not that it was a terrible movie, but as a lot of you will probably remember, it was just like by the numbers Bond. There was just nothing that special about it, which is a shame because the Bond, God, I'm losing the ability to talk here. The one Bond movie that I absolutely loved was Skyfall. It was a tremendous movie, and again, much like Bourne, it focused on this personal story, this time really diving into what Bond's history was, where he came from, how he came to be at MI6. There was far more of a character slant to that story. It wasn't just there's some plot that he's trying to take down. It was just so much more interesting to watch because of that, and you really got to see Daniel Craig tap into Bond as a character and unearth what was happening beneath the surface and what he was really feeling. For that reason, I loved Skyfall in a way that I didn't really like any of the other Daniel Craig movies. So I was a bit 50-50 going into No Time to Die, especially for the fact that we've been waiting for it for so long. I think the expectations have gone up because of that. But boy, am I so glad that it just... Not only did it exceed my expectations, it has really taken on board everything that Bond needed to become to show why it as a franchise still has a place in modern cinema. No Time to Die more or less picks up from where Spectre left off, where we see Bond and Madeline living out the fantasy lifestyle that they want to have with each other, where they're removed from all the stuff that's going on in the world and they just get to be with one another. And it's interesting to see, especially against such a lovely backdrop that they pick. But as the movie goes on and the sort of the plot expands and there is the undercurrent of something larger happening, what the movie holds on to is that central relationship between Bond and Madeline. That's the concurrent flow throughout the entire movie. That's what keeps the whole thing pushing forward. And there's even a bit later on in the movie, about 3/4 of the way through, where Bond admits to Madeline that even though he recognizes everything that's at stake and he's doing his job by investigating everything, I'm trying to avoid spoilers to a certain extent, he admits that it all pales in comparison to how he feels about her, and she is the most important thing to him, to the point where he's just going through the motions, but what he's more invested in is their relationship. And that's really interesting to see that is the forefront of this movie. It's just not something we've really seen from a Bond film before, but because you have that emotional stake in those two characters, it keeps everything moving forward in a way that doesn't feel rushed, in a way that like Quantum of Solace did, for instance, where you really were just moving from one story beat to the next. There is a genuine progression here that shows how these two people evolve with one another under different circumstances, and that is just so much more interesting to watch. And in fact, it's the characterization of Madeline that taps into something that this film does really well, which is how it portrays its female characters. And it's no secret to anyone that typical Bond girls just don't really have that much agency. I mean, the Daniel Craig series has done a bit more towards peeling back that sort of problematic archetype that the Bond series as a whole has set for itself. But what this movie does really well is in having, well, for starters, aside from Madeline, Bond does not sleep with any of the women that he meets during this movie, which that in itself is a bit of a refreshing take. But there is just so much going on with these characters. Like, for instance, earlier on in the film, he has to team up with Ana de Armas's character, Paloma, who is this new CIA agent who is working out of Cuba, and she brings some of the biggest laughs in the film. She is like really eager to get out onto the battlefield, but she's also really nervous, and in doing so, it's just really funny to see a more human take on what life must be like as an agent, particularly against the more stern atmosphere that Bond has always carried throughout the film series. So that was just so much fun to watch. But the big addition to the cast is, of course, the new 007, who is played brilliantly by Lashana Lynch and known as Nomi in the film. And here is a perfect example of No Time to Die recognizing what it needs to do in order to progress with the times. And I don't just mean that in a sense of finally there is a woman in a 00 role, but just the fact that the film recognizes that it's not all about Bond. And I mean that in the sense of the world that it has been building. It always seemed really strange to me that MI6, of course, has other 00 agents, but we rarely ever see them. And that always seems so strange to me, particularly now when we have massive franchises like the MCU that, of course, have characters pop up across different films and even in various storylines they are mentioned. Whereas it seems strange to me that Bond works as part of a larger organization and we never see any of these other agents. They just don't seem to come up in any way. And finally, we get to see more of that world building happening here. And it's just great to see two 00 agents out in the field at the same time. It's just, yeah, really cool to see. And again, it reminds me of the thing that Mission Impossible does so well nowadays, is in having an actual team go out to try and take down the enemy of each film. It just is always more interesting than seeing someone lone gun it, unless of course you're talking about John Wick, but that relies so much on the choreography of all those fight scenes that it's less about him as a character. But I digress. The fact that we have this new 007 is just one of the best things about the movie. But the last thing that I want to talk about is the ending, and this is where I'm going to put up major spoiler warning. So if you haven't watched the movie, don't watch the rest of this video, because it's so much better if you just go and watch the movie for yourself instead of having this ending spoiled for you. Yeah, the sooner you do that, the better. But you've been given your warning, so I'm just going to dive right into it now. So this ending, you really have to applaud the producers for just going all in. The fact that we knew that this was going to be the final Bond film with Daniel Craig, and they could have, they could have decided to go the easy route and just have him sail off into the sunset or drive off into the sunset and get to live out, that paradise that he kind of wished for himself. But if they had done that, it would have ignored the fact that that has kind of already happened twice in the Daniel Craig series. So to do it a third time really would have felt kind of forced just to meet that sort of happy ending. So to have Bond perish in a way that showed his character coming full circle by putting someone else ahead of himself, and really that's why he stays on the island at the end to protect Madeline and Mathilde, is just really rewarding to see. It's one of those things that you're not likely to forget anytime soon, because how often do you get to say Bond dies at the end of the film? It never happens. You got to applaud the producers here, because they went all in, and honestly I think the movie is just so much better for it. So really, I cannot stress this enough. Go and watch No Time to Die in the cinema. It is one of those cultural phenomenon films that I think if you didn't go and watch it with an audience, you would be kicking yourself years into the future. Of course, with Bond dying at the end, it does pose the question of where does the series go next? And I think it's probably fairly obvious that what has to happen next is a complete hard reset or reboot, whatever you want to call it, because without Bond, you can't really continue the series in the way that I imagine the producers would want to do. Because of course, you could keep things going with the existing characters that are there, but you just wouldn't be able to have, because where are you going to put James Bond in there? The series doesn't work unless he is there to some extent. So it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do going forward. But I do think this could be a great opportunity for change in a way that makes sense, because now the producers have an opportunity to tell a story that really is different. You could have maybe a younger Bond that's just learning the ropes at MI6 and is going out on his first mission, something that we haven't really seen in cinema before. Something like that would just be really interesting, and it would help to separate it particularly from the Daniel Craig era, which has done this sort of middle-aged to, not even middle-aged, I'll say, what age would he have been when he started? Let's say adult man to middle-aged man era Bond. So it would be interesting to see something a bit different. But of course, that's going to be some ways off. In fact, we now know that we won't know who will have been picked to be the next Bond until next year in 2022. So until then, really, it's speculation aplenty as to what might happen. So really, I'm going to pose the question to you. What would you like to see from the next Bond series? Let me know in the comments below. If you have seen the movie, also let me know what you think about it. If there's anything that I've missed, then I would love to really hear your take on it. Honestly, I will probably see this movie a third time, if I'm being honest, because it's just such an achievement. I wholeheartedly agree with all of those 5-star reviews. It is just a triumph of filmmaking, and really, this is the conclusion that Bond deserved. And yeah, just what a film.